Hey everybody, welcome to the Dynasty365 show. Tonight we are here with Tyler Heil, and I am your host, Stacey Perez. We have got very special guest here tonight with us. We've got Scott Connor is joining us. You know him from Trades in 5, Destination Devi, Chasing the Helmet. He's a 6-time FFPC champion. And this week we're going to be picking his brain about Dynasty strategy and figuring out how to help you get a leg up on the competition. Let's get to it. All right. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel over on YouTube, head on over to fantasyandframes.com for some awesome fantasy football content and advice from all of us here at Fantasy and Frames. Let's welcome our guest, Scott Connor. You can find his content all over social media. Scott, how are you tonight?
I'm good. Glad to be here. Talking Dynasty, the busiest time of the year, I would say, for me. I was at 25 drafts at a time last week, so I had at all times probably 30 to 40 tabs open because I have a tracker that makes sure I don't miss players, just so I don't get caught up in the clock and miss players that might be on the board, so I can actually try to move around the board. But awesome time, favorite time of Dynasty season. It'll be followed by about a month or two where there's not a lot to do and just talk about the upcoming season and rehash stuff that we've already talked about for the last couple months. But no, glad to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm definitely going to get to asking you about how you keep track of all those teams and make sure that you don't miss anything a little bit more later. But I definitely want to pick your brain on that. Tyler, how are you doing? How's your week going?
It's going well. I am a little frustrated. My wife and I were trying to hurriedly put up a light fixture before the show, and we were just about to finish, and we messed up the very start of it. So we had to take it all the way down. God, I started throwing things. Okay, I'm good now.
I don't envy you on trying to put things together. I hate doing stuff like that. I have zero skill at all.
I have to be good at it.
See, one of you does. See, I'm just gonna call one of my friends' husbands and have them come over and do it for me. That's what I'm gonna do. But guys, don't forget to drop your comments and questions for Scott in the chat, please. We will make sure to get to those. First off the bat, I want to talk some trades. I want to talk some strategy with you guys. First off, and this is really probably more for me, just because I'm a little bit newer to Dynasty. How do you evaluate trade requests and know if, or have a good idea about how do I know if this is a good value? Is what they're asking for, a decent compared to what I would be giving up? And like I said, maybe this is just more so for me, but it's something I struggle with. Scott, how can I get better at that? What is your process?
So I'll try to keep this pretty short, but anyone that follows my content knows I am very much process over players, very systematic in my approach to Dynasty. And so it's not so much about when I get a trade, what are the players involved? What are the draft picks involved? It's more about retraining your brain. A Dynasty league is just a complicated algebra equation that has parameters that are built in based on the scoring settings, based on how many roster spots, how many in the starting lineup, the rules, all of that stuff go into play. You're just trying to solve for the variables, right? And I think sometimes we spend way too much time trying to solve for the variables that have the most difficult answers to find, which is what players are going to do what. How's a player going to be used? How's the ball going to bounce when the games start? We spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. And then weird stuff happens and we just go, oh, it was variance. Couldn't have seen that coming. It was a fluke. That's why I play best ball. People will say stuff like that. And I think when you get a trade, for me, I'm managing almost 100 leagues at this point, between 50 plus Dynasty leagues. And then we get into redraft season. It's like, oh, I signed up for another 50 leagues there. And it's a lot to manage. But just in Dynasty, I think you have to know, especially if you play in a lot of leagues that have similar formats, right? So let's say you play in FFPC, for instance. You know the format. It's pretty stock. You know exactly what the rules are. You know what the parameters are. You know how many roster spots. You kind of have a value of what draft picks are worth. That's how you evaluate the trade. You almost have to know some of the math involved when you get the trade. Does it make sense in an FFPC league to ever do a trade where you're getting 4 pieces for 1? Right? You only have 20 roster spots. You only have 8 starters in a standard league, 10 starters if it's like a triflex league. But that's pretty shallow compared to a league where there's massive rosters and you start 13 players. It's totally different. In that case, if I gave you a league, Stacey, where there's 8 starters versus 13 starters, the players don't matter at that point. You're going to look at the value of the players differently. One league, you're going to go, man, give me 3 pieces for 1 if I have to start 13. In another league where I only have to start 8, give me the 1 player. Most often than not, give me the best piece. You can have all the spare parts. So there's just a lot of math that comes into it. And so I know all my formats. I know it by the league. I can already tell you basically the scoring, the rules, the parameters, everything. So that's my first thing is having a good grasp on where I play, what type of format it is. And I play in all types of leagues. But I know when I get the trade, okay, I already know this league, that's probably not what I'm looking for. Then I'll dive a little bit further into it. Does it actually make sense to go and do a counter offer or message the person or anything like that? So I think that's where you have to start. If it's just about the players, you've probably already lost because the caliber of Dynasty player that's playing today versus even 3 years ago, there's a lot more people that are in leagues that you'll find that have a process. And they're going, you know what? I play in 15, 20 leagues. I don't really care about the players. I have a process, and I'm going to drill the process over and over and over. And they're sending out trade offers, trying to find the people that are maybe a little bit behind, and they're just chasing certain players. They think they can predict what's going to happen during the games, and they're still chasing players. Like, that's the kind of person that they're trying to catch with one of these trade offers. So my advice is don't be caught. Understand like what arena you're playing in when you get the trade. Then you can go, okay, we're playing in the right form of trade that I want to make. Now, does it make sense for my roster to trade for these actual players or trade away picks or whatever it might be? So that's my best advice. I mean, if you're just starting out, before you just jump into a league and you say, I need to go have T. Higgins on this team because he's my favorite player, start by understanding the math of the league. Understand, you know, all the rules, all the roster spots, the scoring. Figure all of that out first, then go find somebody that you trust to talk about players of where to put those players within your roster. That's the easiest way to say it. It's easy for somebody that plays in a lot of leagues to have to play that way. But I think that's where I'd start. It'll make you a much better process player down the road, and you'll start to understand when people start really hitting some of the higher level dynasty theory. You'll get it faster than somebody that's played for 3 or 4 years and still asks the same basic questions over and over.
No, that's great. I mean, I think I'm always so adverse to doing it just because I haven't really thought through that whole process, but that's such a great way to explain it and break it down. I mean, I'm over here looking at like players like, oh, does it make sense with this player or that player? But I don't know if you saw me, I was over here taking notes. So hopefully my teams will do a little bit better. Tyler, do you have any ideas, any tips for maybe some newbies that, you know, would help them when they're getting trade requests?
Yeah, you know, what Scott said is extremely important of know the rules of the league, know your roster spots, know what arena you're playing in. If you do not know all of that chapter and verse, you probably should not be looking at making a trade. Otherwise, you would like to come away with the best player in a trade, but it's a lot of situational stuff when you're talking trades. Is your team ready to win now? Are you not? Are you trying to set yourself up for the future? Are you going for picks? You just have to ask yourself a lot of those questions. Whereas when you're trying to win, you just want that one best player. So I guess my best advice is know the rules of your league, know your team, understand what you're trying to accomplish with a trade, and try to make your starting lineup better. You know, if you're getting 2 players, if you have 1 player in your starting lineup that is really, really, really bad, and you can get 2 players and upgrade like 1.5 spots, I mean, you're still winning there.
Yeah. All right, guys. So with that being said, I've got a few hypotheticals for you. And the first one's kind of a softball. But let's say you have the 104 pick this year, right? And somebody offers you Travis Kelce in a trade for that spot. Is that something that you would be interested in? I mean, is it Travis Kelce or bust? Because obviously he's the best tight end. Or do you know that he's getting a little bit older? I'm sure eventually there's going to be a drop off. I think everybody says it every year and it never happens. So I don't know if he's like on the TB12 diet or something like that, where he's just going to play until his 40s and be amazing. Or do you prefer like youth at that point and say, no, I'd rather have somebody new? Scott, what do you think about that particular situation?
So I said before the show, Stacey, I'm going to ask you some questions. What is the format we're talking here? Are we talking one QB or super flex?
Okay. So in this situation, actually, let's go one QB. Let's go one QB here.
So one QB, assuming that there's nothing really strange about the league settings or scoring, I'm taking Travis Kelce.
Yeah, pretty standard.
I already know that what I'm probably getting at, and this goes into I'm not going to go down the road with this question, but one of the huge things that we do over at Destination Devi and in like my Patreon channel is we talk about WAR, or wins over replacement, which is essentially it's something that's been used in baseball forever, but it's a way to measure how impactful a player is on your team. And it's essentially how many wins over replacement. So if you had to replace something with the very average, how much is that player giving over that amount? And one of the major things that you notice is, especially it's not just Travis Kelce, but the last couple of years it's been Travis Kelce, is when you have those onesie positions, specifically tight end in this case, it's almost insurmountable to be able to overcome that, especially if you're talking about, like, let's say an FFPC league where it's only 8 starters and you are literally gaining 1.5 wins a season just by having Travis Kelce, and at least half the people in your league are just hoping to stay afloat. So they're essentially having to just hope they pick the right starter in that spot to just break even. And so right there, that is worth more, even though you would say, oh man, he's old. He's 33 years old. How much longer is he going to play? What am I drafting at the 104? It's probably Jordan Addison or Quentin Johnston or someone like that.
Right.
And understanding the wins over replacement at wide receiver, you know how hard it is to hit on a receiver that exceeds where Travis Kelce is? You basically need to hit on Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp. Like, you have to hit that level. Otherwise, all you're really paying for here is just the youth of the asset that you're buying. So sure, you get Jordan Addison. Maybe you have more outs to trade him down the road. But if you have any hopes of trying to win, like, you're just going to take the positional advantage and lock that down. And it also has a cascade effect. You now don't have to probably roster as many tight ends on your team. So you're gaining some value by taking Travis Kelce too, because you're probably alleviating 1 or 2 extra roster spots that you don't have to spend going, man, I don't have a tight end. So now I need to carry 3 of them and hope that one of them is better than what I expect. Now you only need to carry 2. It's why people in redraft leagues only draft 1 tight end when they draft Travis Kelce. If he goes down, it already hurts you so much. You might as well just pick one off the waiver wire. There's no point in holding 1 or 2 until that happens. If it happens, you'll deal with it. And in Dynasty, it's even easier to deal with it when it happens, because you can still trade him. You can still trade for somebody else. So long story, but I'm taking Kelce in that circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, if he goes down, nobody's replacing Travis Kelce. I mean, nobody's coming in and putting up the production that he puts up. It's just not happening. Tyler, do you have any different thoughts on that particular situation?
On one QB, I do not. There's a definite tier in this class of elite producers. And even it's not my wide receiver 1, but everyone's consensus wide receiver 1, Jackson Smith-Njigba, he's immediately sharing time with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett and Geno Smith throwing them the ball. So, what are you getting there? You could be getting a back-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 at best. Give me Kelce all day, and especially in one QB.
Definitely. All right, guys. My second question, this is a little personal because this relates to my my Dynasty team, and I need a debate settled between my Dynasty partner, Jim, and I, because we have the 101 this year. I know that, obviously our team is wonderful, right? We got the first pick. We got the first pick last year too, so we're not doing great. Yeah, I know it's ugly. So last year we did trade it, so we didn't get Brees Hall. It's too much. It's too long of a story to tell you what we did. But so our team's not exactly competitive, right? So my question is, are we taking Bijan, right, as that potential generational talent? Or are we saying, look, we've got the 101. Our team is not great this year. They're not going to compete. They're more than one player away from competition. Are we trading that to try to boost up the team, try to help them get competitive in the years to come? So I don't know if I should tell you which one I fall on, because I don't know if I'm going the more emotional side, right? I want Bijan. I love this player. I think he's so exciting. And I think it would really just physically just hurt me to give him away. And I know, Scott, you just talked about you don't like players, but I don't know that I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try to get there a little bit, but right now I just really like Bijan. And Jim seems to think that we need to trade him and get some more draft capital. So, Scott, Tyler, I need you guys to settle this debate. Scott, tell me if I'm right or wrong.
So again, I'm going to ask you. It's one QB, I assume, right?
It's one QB. Okay, it's one QB, right? 3 receivers. Tell me what else you need to know.
How many starters? So how many players in the starting lineup?
So 10.
10. Okay.
10, I think. Yeah, 10.
Okay, so 10 players in the starting lineup. So in one QB, I actually was just looking at Sata the other day. The wins over replacement or the WAR data on the 101, especially this year, is massive compared to almost any package you could get in a trade down, right? Especially this class, there's really not a lot of options where you're like, okay, I'm really comfortable pivoting down to 2 of these pieces in this draft to take instead of drafting Bijan, even if your team isn't ready. And I've been a big proponent all year of 2/3 of the teams I see in my leagues that have the 101, they're not ready for Bijan Robinson. Like they don't have quarterbacks or they don't have a lot of talent. And it's like, sure, they got this 101, but I think part of the reason a lot of people quote unquote tanked so much to get it is so that they could turn around and trade it for similar to what like Saquon Barkley was going for 5 years ago. And the reality is the dynasty market doesn't value the running back like that anymore. Just not there. That sure, you can put them on the block. You might find a couple people that are willing to pay close to what you want, but the options are not like what they used to be. There's probably half the people in your league. They're like, I'm not going to trade that much for a running back. No, thanks. I'll give you something okay, but it's not going to be enough to where you're just, okay, I have 5 people trying to get this pick, and they're all sending me really, really good offers. So I think you have to pick a lane. I would say that is your team closer than you think to being competitive? If Bijan's really good, maybe he puts you a little closer to that. You have time to trade him over the next 4 months. He's not going to get hurt in the next 4 months because he's not going to play. At the same time, though, like I did a trade in a super flex league with 11 starters. So say you add a quarterback to basically what we're talking about here. I traded Bijan for Jahmyr Gibbs and Jackson Smith-Njigba.
Oh,
so I got a 2 for 1. And I'm like, okay, in this format, I have to start 11 players. I'm getting 2 guys that are probably in my lineup right away or pretty close to right. And I'm kind of hedging bets on if Bijan isn't an all-world talent, like let's say he's just Jonathan Taylor and he gives me 20 points per game. How close can Gibbs get to that to where I don't feel that loss that much? And I'm essentially getting another really high-end asset with Jackson Smith-Njigba. So that type of trade, I would almost do that regardless of where my team is. So I think it depends on the type of deal, Stacey.
Okay.
I'm good taking Bijan unless it is a very specific 2-for-1 trade. I don't want a 4-for-1 trade. I don't want a 2-for-1 trade where one of the pieces I'm getting is barely in my lineup. It has to be 2 legitimate players where I go, okay, these are top 50 or better players, if not top 30 or better players. Only other exception would be is someone offering you Jamar Chase for the 101, Justin Jefferson for the 101. Like if it's not one of those 2 players, you need to add something to it. So that's the principle. If someone offers you Garrett Wilson and a future first-round pick, like, okay, I will take that because both those assets probably are ones where I can upgrade my starting lineup. But if it's not that, if it's throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall, just hoping you accept the trade, and it's really not what you want, pick Bijan.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, listen, Scott, I totally thought that you were going to, that was what I want to do. I want to pick Bijan. So I definitely thought that you were going to tell me I needed to suck it up and trade him. So love it. Love that answer. Tyler, what do you think about this?
Well, I'm going to ask you a question now, Stacey.
Okay.
Everyone says this in the NFL draft as well. Well, they'll just trade down. They'll just trade down.
Yeah.
You have to have a buyer to trade down. So what are your offers? Do you have offers? Are you just saying you need to trade him, or are you just winging it here?
No, so I don't have any offers just yet. And I think that was kind of like, I was trying to think ahead, like, okay, are we 100% committed to keeping this? Are we going to be open to offers? Kind of what is our situation going into, this year? So no, we don't have any offers yet. Usually this particular league, we don't really get any till closer to the season starts. This is my fourth year in that league. So that's kind of what I noticed. We don't usually do that till closer to the season. So to answer your question, no, we don't have any offers.
Okay. All right. So I guess my best answer is, in my opinion, and it sounds like your team's pretty bad here, Stacey.
It sucks.
I'm not having a lot of faith.
We have one win in the last 2 years, guys. One win. That's terrible.
So if you can get
kicked
people
off the show now.
Hey, we all have those leagues that we're not proud of. Don't worry. If you can get people that you can put in your starting lineup, because at the end of the day, 1A player and 4 D players is not better than 5 B players. If you can better your starting lineup with that trade, with proven players and picks, then I say go for it. So example here, I just traded for the 101 in a league. I had the 102. I had the 102 by chance. It was another team's pick, so I'm ready to compete. So Jahan Dotson, the 102, the 201, and a 24 second for the 101. So that's a nice return for him. It's a proven player in Jahan Dotson, and you still get the 102. So he got the quarterback of his choice. So I guess long answer short is, if you are making more spots in your starting lineup better, I say go for it.
That's a great way to look at it too, I think. Guys, we have a question in the chat, and I hope that I'm saying this person's name right. Tito Leewood wants to know, they've got a 12-team with Superflex. Yeah, Superflex half-point PPR. They have got an inbox offer to give the 211 and a 24 second for Calvin Ridley. What advice can we give them, Scott? Do we need more information?
No, I think you can probably accept this trade. It is half PPR. It is a start 10. So Calvin Ridley is probably right on the fringe of like your flex range player. But he's really given up the 211 in this year's class, which I like this year's class, but it's a lot of picks where your roster has to be set up correctly for. Like, this is actually a pretty good running back class to just take as many shots at running back as you can, but you have to have the roster built to do that. So, because you're not drafting, Roshan Johnson or Tank Bigsby, and you're going, wow, I'm excited this guy's going to start right away. You're kind of just stashing them and having faith that they're a running back. They have talent, but things are probably going to have to break the right way. So I'm fine taking this. You're essentially giving up 2 seconds for a guy you probably can put in your lineup. So I'm okay with that. And you free up a roster spot. A lot of people play in leagues that have pretty shallow waiver wires, like only 20, 25 man rosters. Like, you're going to be able to pick somebody up instead of having 2 players now. So there's a little bit of extra value there too. So I'll take Ridley.
Okay. Tyler, are you taking Ridley?
I'm taking Ridley. The guys you're getting at 211 this year, I have on a similar tier to guys that you can get at like 306, 307. So if you want to look at it tier wise, you're giving up a second and a third for Calvin Ridley, who could very well be Trevor Lawrence's wide receiver 1, I'm doing that all day.
Okay. All right, Tito, I hope that answers your question, and best of luck to you this season. Guys, remember to keep putting those questions in there. I will be glad to get them and get them out to the guys to see what our answers are. All right, hypothetical 3. If I have a team where I'm rebuilding, is it better to take more draft picks at running back or wide receiver? Like, which one am I taking more of when I get to the middle rounds of my draft? I mean, receivers I tend to think are a little bit better investment for a rebuilding team than running backs, just, because of their injury prone, their careers aren't quite as long. But this class seems to be more talented at running back than it is a receiver. So for this particular year, Scott, what advice would you give to teams that are rebuilding?
So it's Stacy question time. Stacy, how active is my league? Is my league pretty active here?
Yeah, let's say it's an active league.
Okay. So if I have an active league, unfortunately, running backs are tougher to trade, but they're also, I think, easier equity to move during the season. There's probably a little more demand for them. Receivers, it's a little bit of a misnomer. Good receivers are good investments long-term. Most receivers are bad investments long-term, especially receivers that are not drafted like in the top 40. I could rattle off some names and I could go, Tyler, what do you think of Rondale Moore? You like him? I could rattle off a bunch of, how about Michael Gallup? You like him? Chase Claypool?
Oh, I used to like Michael Gallup.
A lot of we used to like them 2 years ago when they were Jaden Reed and Rashee Rice. And so historically, receivers that are drafted outside the top 40 actually don't have a long shelf life in terms of like fantasy viability. They're going to be in the league longer. Like Chase Claypool will probably have 10-year career, 8-year career, but he's probably already past the point where he's worth anything. And he's definitely not somebody in your lineup. So that's what happens to a lot of these receivers that people are drafting in the middle rounds this year. There's a ton of them. There's names where you'll find somebody out there that loves Josh Downs or Marvin Mims or Jalen Hyatt, swears they're going to be the next guy that hits from the 3rd and 4th round. But the reality is like maybe it's about 5 to 10% in that range. So I would take the running backs because I don't really want to make draft picks when my team is terrible. I want to try to find ways to kick draft picks to the future where I have even more value in the future picks. So I can see a path where I can trade. Sure, Stacey, you can draft 5 receivers in the middle rounds. 3 of them are probably going to be never worth more than what you spent on them.
Yeah.
One of them might be, and then the other one, you might hit on 1 out of 5. Running backs, I think if I draft Tank Bigsby, Roshan Johnson, even Chase Brown, Eric Gray, there could be a window where someone gives you 2 seconds, which is double what you paid. Someone might even give you a first for the right running back in the right spot. You just have to have an active league, which is why I asked that. If it's an active league and you're an active manager, draft the running backs, even as a rebuilding team, with the idea, hey, if I have a Damian Pierce or a Rashad White from last year, you could have traded them. And I would have rather held those during the season than drafting some of the receivers that were going in the 3rd round.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it's this. You see a theme with my questions here. I was definitely going to take advantage of you being on tonight and get some advice for my poor little team. All right, guys. So last hypothetical before we move on. If you have a stacked roster on a championship contender team where you've got multiple starting level wide receivers that are on your bench, would you overpay with a handful of those starting level receivers for one high level receiver to strengthen your starting lineup? Or is that depth too valuable in an unpredictable game? Tyler, this is your question.
It is.
Do you want Scott to answer first?
Yeah.
Or do you want to take it? Which one?
I want Scott to answer first because I put this question in there, and like you, Stacy, this was a personal question. I mean, I've already made the decision, but I think it's a good topic to discuss.
So I'm going to shout out a really cool person in the Dynasty space, Adiko. I don't know if anybody's seen some of the stuff he puts out. He's under, I believe, Bulletproof Fantasy now, but he posted this chart. I will never forget it. He posted, I believe, at the end of 2021. But he went through and just pulled data from historic leagues and looked at what do you think? I'm going to ask both of you this question. Even if you have, now assume you do not have like every single good player in the league. Let's assume, just picture like of all the dynasty leagues you're in, the best couple teams that anybody has across those leagues, right? So they're built pretty strong. They have a lot of good players. You're like, yeah, this team's probably the favorite to win the championship. But assuming there's like a 6-person or 6-team playoff, what is the best odds you probably have to win the championship going into the playoffs? What percentage would you say? If I'm the number 1 seed, I went 13-1 in the regular season, I clearly have the best team. What are my odds of winning the title?
25.
Just throw out a number.
Scott, I was told there would be no math tonight.
1 through 100. You just throw out a number.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Tyler. I like 25%. That's probably a good number. That's the easy answer. Sorry.
You're close. You're close. It's a little more. It's between like 30 and 36%. But essentially what that's saying is no matter what you do, there's still variance you can't stop it. Look at last year with Buffalo and Cincy, right? You had those players, you were stacked, and then a variance happens and you can't control it. Look at like the Rams-Chargers game last year. That was a team you thought that would be a shootout in week 17, right? And then it isn't. So the fact is, like, you only have so much you can do when you build a really good roster. So Tyler could build this stacked roster, and it's kind of depressing to think, Tyler, I don't care how good your team is. The most you have is probably about a 35% chance of winning the title. So what do you do if you have that? Once you're there and you have some excess, I mean, this question is, I have multiple starting level receivers on my bench. Sure, you can go, you know what? I have all this extra money in the bank. I'm going on vacation this weekend, and I'm going to spend a lot of it and just have fun. That's essentially what you're doing when you're spending 3 or 4 pieces and overpaying to get one stud. But then what happens if the stud is Jamar Chase and his game gets canceled in week 17? That's part of that 65% that you weren't going to win, right? So what I like to do is this. When I have a really good roster, I still want to stick to my dynasty principles. But what I do is I go try to find edges that I can bet against teams that are trying to beat me, trying to chase me. Can I go to my competition and say, okay, can I trade my competition, my wide receiver 5, not my wide receiver 8, my wide receiver 5, and pick up their first round pick next year? And if that's a team that thinks that's the piece that gets them in the playoffs, what if it doesn't? Now I just netted a top 4 or 5 pick. I have the depth to slide in and replace that player, and they still aren't going to beat me, right? Like, you're selling to somebody that's trying to chase you, but they're trying to buy the assets from you, and you're still confident that you're going to have that 35%, and they're going to probably be more in the 10 to 15%. So that's my strategy. I go to the middle of the pack teams, and I go, all right, you want to buy? You want to buy from me? You probably don't want to buy from the richest person in the industry because they still have more than you. You're not going to catch them. That's essentially what I try to do. I go to teams. I go, you know what? I don't think Stacy's that good at Dynasty. I'm going to bet against her team. She has a first round pick. She's willing to trade. She thinks by trading for that Jahan Dotson on my team, that's going to get her in the playoffs. But then what if it doesn't and it ends up being the 103? My team didn't take a ding by trading, especially when you're trading like receivers like that, or like running back 2s or QB 2s. Like, if you're trading just from your depth and you're getting somebody to kind of quote unquote overpay, really what they're overpaying is, man, the payoff for you down the road could be, I just turned Geno Smith, because someone was desperate for a quarterback, into the 103. And it didn't hurt your team at all, because you probably have the depth to slide in for those spots. So I think dealing from your strength, but never losing that edge to where you hold the most assets. Once you have a team there and you establish those principles, it's really hard to beat you, because you're always making moves that even if my team goes backwards 10% in a year, I'm always looking to the future as well. So there really isn't I'm rebuilding or I'm going for it. I'm winning and I'm rebuilding. I'm reloading at the same time.
Oh my goodness. I feel like I have learned so much, like, already. All right, we have a question in the chat. Looks like Josh wants to know, in the 2022 rookie draft, Tyler Algier or Wan'Dale Robinson? So
I know Josh. Josh is a good dude.
Oh, you know Josh. All right, so
I know Josh.
Go for it, Scott.
No, I'm curious on Tyler's thoughts on this, because I think this is I don't know what his angle is with the question. How would you answer this one, Tyler? Would it be who you prefer right now, or who you would have preferred last year when you made the pick?
I'm answering it from who I would have picked last year, because he specifically said in the 2022 rookie draft. And even right now, I think my answer would be the same. I think my answer would be Tyler Algier. And full disclosure, Tyler Algier was my RB3 in 2022. So let's not talk about who is my RB4, but I felt pretty good about Algier at my RB3. So, and even if you did pick him in 2022, and let's say you weren't a competing team, you've already sold Tyler Algier for more than what you've paid for him. He was a productive back all season, last season. He's still going to be productive even with Bijan, because Bijan's probably going to play in the slot half the time. So, and Wandale is, like you said, Scott, just another wide receiver that could be a toss-up. So Algier has already produced. He's probably going to produce this year. He's the backup to a guy at an oft-injured position. So I'm going Algier.
Yeah, I'm in lockstep with you. I think that's where people go wrong. They look at receivers like Josh also put in the chat this year, Tank Bigsby versus Marvin Mims, kind of the same thing. And I like Marvin Mims, but if I'm looking at this, and I think we look at running backs in a really weird light now in Dynasty, we look at players and we go, wow, that guy's not going to get all the carries. He's not going to get all the receptions. I don't really want him. When really, if you're drafting somebody like Tank Bigsby or Chase Brown, what you're hoping for is a role that they earn where they kind of stay in that role for a couple years and they give you some sort of equity in your lineup, especially a shallower lineup. Who are you more likely to know when to start? It's probably going to be Tyler Algier. It's going to be easy. Yeah. You know when to probably play him. You know when to not play him. It feels like a lot of the receivers, they're just going to kind of be stuck on, wow, my last flex. Do I play Marvin Mims or two other guys like Marvin Mims on my bench? So I think Tyler nailed the answer. It's still Tyler Algier. And I think a lot of people would go, I don't want Tyler Algier. Now he's behind Bijan Robinson. But it's the same reason in redraft, Stacey, we take like Alexander Madison in the 9th round every year. It's you want 3 or 4 of those guys on every team because you know there's things that are going to happen. And if you draft a player in the 9th or 10th round of a redraft league and you get 2 starts out of them, you'll take that.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what you're doing in Dynasty. So don't fall for, I don't know how many Dynasty rosters I look over, and out of 30 people on the roster, they have 18 wide receivers. And half of them are, you're still carrying Jalen Reagor and N'Keal Harry and Brian Edwards. I mean, you're literally just wasting roster spots. Yeah. So I think Tyler nailed it. His analysis was perfect. Yeah. Like, give me the running back. Unless it's a high-end receiver, give me a running back.
Yeah, those two especially. I mean, they're so injury prone in that situation. I mean, even if you know their role, potentially they could have a bigger role in that offense, and then you know exactly what they're going to do and what to expect from them. I mean, I love Marvin Mims. I think he's great. I don't even know about this year for him potentially. I would be a little bit more nervous taking him now, as opposed to maybe in the future. I think he might have a bigger role in Denver. But out of this group and this specific question, I mean, I'm definitely taking the running back in both those situations. So, yeah. Thanks, Joshua. Everybody else, too, please feel free to drop in some more questions for all of us. These are great. I love the comments and everything that we're getting in the chat. So, guys, I want to move on to a different topic now. I want to talk a little bit about what the RAS score is. Am I saying that right? RAS score, right? RAS? Scott, tell me about this. Tell me about the RAS. What composes it? Why is it important? Is it important? Kind of take me to school on this a little bit, please.
I'm glad you put this on the show sheet. When I saw it, it made me smile because it's one of those topics that I think it's gotten more popular over the last couple of years. The guy who runs it is by the name of Kent Platt. He goes by the handle @MathBomb on Twitter. You'll see those RAS cards that get posted. Usually right after the combine, your Twitter feed is just inundated with the RAS scorecards. And it's essentially a scorecard measuring the relative athleticism. That's what it is, relative athleticism score for a player. He does it for all the positions. My main use for the RAS score, you see it posted for everybody. You see offensive linemen, safeties. I mean, every position they do RAS cards for. So, you see it for everybody. And I think a lot of times it gets misused. Like, to be quite honest, I probably don't care that much how athletic a wide receiver is, for instance. Like, a wide receiver to me is much more, especially today's game where it's so friendly for the offenses. Half the good receivers today are small. Like, I want to know, are you good at receiving? Are you a good receiver? Do you have good hands? Can you run routes? Can you separate? All those kind of things. If you can do that, I mean, look at guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown or Deontay Johnson. Like, their value is they can get open and they can draw targets. I don't care how athletic they are. So I think for RAS scores that it can mislead you for a lot of positions. My biggest use has been at the tight end position. And that is where it literally, like, you can go through the historic data, which I've covered on my show. And it is so predictive for tight ends that I essentially just eliminate anybody that isn't within certain thresholds. So we can talk more about that. But for the tight end specifically, like, it is where you start for me with tight ends. Like, draft capital matters, but even draft capital, you see tight ends get drafted for different reasons, right? Not every team drafts tight ends to be what you want for fantasy. So it's a complicated position that takes a while to learn. Some of the best ones are guys that didn't even play football in college or have converted from other positions. And you go, well, how did that work? How did Logan Thomas go from a quarterback to having a top 12 tight end season? But then there's 10 other guys that convert to tight end. From wide receiver, they should be good at catching the ball, right? Because they're receivers, but then they never make it. Like, what separates them? So using the relative athletic score is something that I've used religiously for the tight end position. I'm sure we'll talk about it more.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about more is so you said that's where you start with that. So talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So what I've done is, you can pull up these RAS cards. Now the player has to go through almost all of the drills at the combine. You'll see a couple of cards where maybe they won't have one thing in there. But they really have to do everything to have a complete RAS card. Otherwise, people will improvise and they'll come up with stuff and go, well, he didn't run a 40 time, but we'll guess, or we'll take one that they ran 2 years ago and we'll just kind of estimate that maybe that player is just as fast now, which really isn't accurate. So you have to be able to understand that not every RAS card is perfect if it doesn't come from the RAS site. And then not every player has a RAS card. So I'll just throw that out there. But I went through and just looked at tight end production because one of my hypotheses was that tight end production in college does not necessarily translate to NFL production. We've seen tight ends come in and you go, that guy didn't even get used in college. And all of a sudden he's the best option at tight end in the NFL. And then there's a lot more tight ends in college where you go, wow, that guy was the best tight end in the conference. He gets to the NFL and he doesn't even make it. Look at somebody like Harrison Bryant, right? He has no Harrison Bryant, Mackey Award winner, awesome tight end in college, gets to the NFL. He's too small. He's not athletic. And everything the Browns have done have said, you know what? He's not our best tight end. In fact, he's probably not even our second best tight end. Every year they've had 2 or 3 tight ends around Harrison Bryant. He's a solid player, but you look at that and you go, what did you miss with Harrison Bryant? Brevin Jordan is another one. And that's the other thing when you look at tight ends with the RAS score is it impacts not only I would say the ceiling for them, but it also impacts how they're going to be used. One of the current ones I'll throw out is Chiggy Okonkwo. A lot of people like Chiggy Okonkwo. He's 6'2". You look historically at tight ends that are 6'2". Rarely, they never, ever does the team play them in a role where they're playing more than half the snaps. So now if you're telling me that this guy's only going to be on the field about half the time or 60% of the time, he better be the best player at his position at drawing targets. Otherwise, they're always going to have a guy like Austin Hooper or someone like that next to him. And you're going to go, why is that guy getting the ball? You're going to watch him play and you go, get it to Chiggy. Don't get it to that guy. But clearly he's limited as a player because of his RAS score. And they just drafted a guy this year that fits that bill. So essentially going through, just looking at the RAS scores, I'll just give some real quick numbers and, just throw this out there because I've covered it on my show, but I'll throw it out there again. So over the last decade, I looked at top 5, top 12, and top 24 seasons. Does a top 24 season at tight end really mean anything? No. Top 12 doesn't really mean much. Top 5, I think you start to get into, okay, if I can hit on a top 5 season, that's pretty predictive. So last decade, if you don't have a RAS score over 7, you have only 10% of the tight ends have had production in the top 5 that have had a RAS score under 7. And then when you see the names, it's the same 2 names. And you're like, clearly those are outliers. So it's like Jordan Reed and Zach Ertz, and that's it. Nobody else. So then you take and you correlate that with like their 40 time, which is part of the RAS score. But I think the 40 time, you can almost stand out and say, okay, if this guy's really slow, but he's just athletic for his size, what does that mean? And so I took that same sample size, and guys that have like 4.7 40s or over, another red flag. Mm-hmm. And then you put that in with draft capital, and you get to numbers where it's like 80% of the tight ends fit all these categories. So the way I use it is like, okay, if I'm shooting for a top 5 tight end, I'm going to be really stringent on who I take. A guy like Michael Mayer, I'm probably not going to take him because there's a pretty good chance based on this data, he's just a solid tight end. And so I'm using it like that. It's a way that I can filter out the tight ends that I don't want to bet on. And especially I play in a ton of leagues where you have to start 2 tight ends, and there's a heavy tight end premium in those 2 to where you can flex the tight ends as well. It's a really good way to decipher, where do I want to draft them? Which ones don't I want? I think that's the biggest strength here is you can eliminate the guys where people go, oh, pick that guy up. No, don't pick that guy up. Don't pick up Brevin Jordan. Don't pick up Harrison Bryant. Don't pick up Chiggy Okonkwo, those types. Isaiah Likely is another one with like a 4.7 RAS score. So it's just when you have one of those guys, they're just automatic sells because I'm just playing the numbers. So that's it in a nutshell. It's just very correlative with production. And, usually you're shooting for an 8+ RAS score and a sub 4.7 40 time. When you have that and those guys get draft capital, that's where you're like, okay, I'm comfortable taking them. So Sam Laporta, for instance, perfect example. Luke Musgrave, perfect example. Tucker Kraft, like those are the names from this year's class where I'm like, I'm interested, especially at the prices that they're going.
Oh, good. My Packers seem to be set up for success then. So
you got 2 of them. The Packers are following the Colts are another team that has followed the RAS score. They've drafted 4 tight ends in the last 3 years that have high RAS scores, and they're doing what the Packers did. Packers go, you know what? We don't really know how to evaluate tight ends great, so let's just take 2 of them. And they're probably going to start both of them this year. And it's like whoever's good is good. And who do you prefer between the 2 Packers tight ends?
Probably Musgrave. If I had to make a choice, I'd probably say Musgrave. I'm still a little partial to Darnell Washington, even though he's not on my Packers. But he was one of my faves. But if I had to pick, I'd probably say Luke Musgrave.
So it's funny that you mentioned those 2 names because so I took my tight end RAS data, right? And then I correlated that with college production and not from the way you would think. So I'm just basically taking what is the lowest common denominator that a tight end has to produce at the college level to fit the criteria that I'm looking for. And I started with a really low bar because if you've watched college football, there's a lot of teams, they don't even use a tight end. Like they're out there, but they never throw them the ball. They're just there, and then you get to the NFL and you go, wow, that guy was never used in college. Like that happens all the time. But if you look at like dominator rating, which is something pretty popular when evaluating receivers, don't look at the actual dominator rating, but look at the percentile. And players that are below like a 15th percentile in college production, so relative to everybody that's ever played receiver, tight end, running back, whatever, below the 15th percentile, that is where the production does not correlate to the NFL. And unfortunately, there's 2 names in this class that are being valued that fit below that criteria, and it's Luke Musgrave and Darnell Washington. The only player that has produced a top 12 season in the last decade that fits all of this criteria and had the below 15th percentile production is Dawson Knox.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
The ceiling for Luke Musgrave, I just say, is Dawson Knox, which that's good or bad, depending on what you think. Probably not so good now that they drafted Kincaid, but for the last 3 years, it was passable. But it's not a great bet to bet on Musgrave or Washington for that one reason.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a bummer, but I feel like better that I understand that now a lot better. So we have a question in the chat real quick before we move on to the last thing that I want to get to. Kookski, I think I'm saying that right. I'm not sure. It has a 1 QB start looks like he's got the 101, 201, 205, and 209. Looks like one PPR. You guys might have to help me with this. Week at QB, he's got 2 in Stafford. 4. What'd you say, Tyler?
I was just saying 4-point touchdown minus 2 interception. That's how I take it. Full PPR start 8.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, that was the one I was like, wait a second. I didn't know. Yeah, so he's weak at QB with 2 in Stafford, thin depth with solid starters. Package 2 seconds to move up to secure Richardson or draft a running back depth. What are we aim for what pick to be sure? Tyler, you've been very quiet, so let me ask you, and then I'll ask that.
I'm trying to do all these calculations in my head. I guess the thing that jumps to mind when he asked that question is secure Anthony Richardson. The quarterback scoring is weighted toward being a competent passer, it seems. Typically, when you have 4-point passing touchdowns, you only have -1 for interception. So it's placing a premium on the quarterback, I guess a negative premium, whatever you want to call it, on the quarterback turning over the ball. You know, Anthony Richardson could be good. He could be Konami code. I promise you that dude's going to throw a lot of interceptions. So I don't know if that's the play there, but it could be. So package seconds to move up or draft running back depth, aim for what pick to be sure. In a 1 QB, I mean, you got Bijan, you got Jahmyr Gibbs, and then to be sure, I would say 104, 105, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I see what he's going for. He has no upside in his quarterback room right now. And in a 4-2, the only quarterbacks I would want is running quarterbacks because the passing is almost nullified by, even if you throw double the amount of touchdowns as you do interceptions, if you just run for 800 yards and 7 rushing touchdowns, like you're crushing even the best pocket passers. So like, I see why he wants Richardson. If you can add Richardson and Bijan and you already have a solid roster, like you're competing right away just with that team. I mean, whenever Richardson plays, even if it's just second half of the season, he can get by with Tua for, half the year until Richardson gets in. But I even expect him as a rookie for him to run. He may not pass well, but I expect him to run as a rookie. So even that, Tyler said 104, 105. I'd probably be a little more frisky and say like 107, because I do think a couple people will take first-round receivers just because of the receiver craze in Dynasty right now. Like someone will take Addison over him. Probably someone takes Johnston over him. Maybe you hedge your bets on Johnston or Flowers because a lot of people don't like one or the other of those. So what would that be? Bijan, Gibbs, JSN, Johnston, or Addison, and then Johnston, Flowers. So 106 is kind of like the range where, and you may get people that snicker at you when you take the quarterback at 106, but you're like, in a start 8, is Zay Flowers really helping your lineup that much? Probably not.
Yeah.
Zay Flowers isn't going to help many lineups, in my opinion.
So here's the thing, though. If you're on the other side of this and you have the 106, Tyler, are you motivated to trade the 106 for those 3 seconds that he has in a start 8? Doesn't it feel like you need to kind of find a sucker to take that trade in the first place?
I think so. I mean, when you're, especially in 1 QB, if you're talking super flex, I'd think about it, but still the 106 is even more valuable in super flex. So a 201, 205, and 209, it might buy you the 108, something like that, 107. What do you think about that, Scott?
I'm kind of with you. I think to secure it, to secure the bag without sweating 2 or 3 picks getting made ahead of you, it's probably the 104. And I would have a hard time taking a quarterback over Jordan Addison, but to really secure it, it's probably the 104, honestly. And you probably have to add a first to this deal to even entertain the person at 104 or 105.
Or add Tua.
I mean, the counter offer, if I got this deal, I don't play in 1 QB anymore, but if I got this offer, it would be, you need to give me Tua and all your picks and a future first.
and
Sure,
David
you
Putney.
can. You can take Richardson, and good luck with them. But I'm gonna make you bleed a little bit on your assets. You're not gonna just trade up and get him and secure that starting lineup. So that's a tough question. That's definitely one where you need to know your league. How have they drafted quarterback? Where did they draft Trey Lance? Where did they draft Justin Fields? If they took him in the mid first, then you better be adding a whole bunch to get up into the top 5.
Yeah. All right, guys. So, Kookski, I hope that answers your question. Again, thank you guys so much for being really active in the chat tonight. Love it. Our last thing before we go, Scott, I know you talked about this a little bit at the beginning. I want to know if you could if somebody's looking to start managing more dynasty teams, really kind of get into that like high volume, like drafting, like how do you keep track of all of it? How do you keep track of your teams, where you are in the draft process, your exposure, that kind of thing? Can you maybe give some people some ideas on how they can go about doing that?
Sure. So one thing I'll plug, I have no affiliation to this, but it's a really good site with a really cool person that's started really developing the tool, but it's called Dynasty-Daddy.com. Sounds weird. People laugh, but DynastyDaddy.com. It's a lot of the tools that are in a lot of paid sites, quite honestly. And, he's constantly evolving it. So if you have multiple teams, you use that site, create an account. It helps you manage your teams. You can do a whole bunch through the site without having to go to your league platform. So I'll check that out. I would say 3 tips. Find a way to track it, whether it's through a site like that. I keep a master Excel spreadsheet that tracks every one of my rosters. I update all of them manually whenever I do anything. So at any point, I can tell you how many times I have a player in Dynasty in this format or whatever. So it is extra work, but I would be lost without it. So that's the first thing. Find a place to track it. Don't just go, oh, I'll go check out that league on the site, but not really have a way of tracking it. The second thing would be understand what I talked about at the beginning of the show. Every league is a math equation. Even if you play in 5 different formats, use that. And this person asked, or this question was about managing a portfolio. So once you get to like 10 plus leagues, you're starting to get into like a quote unquote a portfolio, right? Use the league formats to diversify your players instead of using the players to diversify amongst the leagues. If you're in a 1 QB start 8 league, the type of player you're going to desire is going to be a little bit different than if you're in a 2 QB start 13 league or a start 2 tight end league. In fact, there's going to be players you'll roster on some and you have no interest in rostering on the other. Use that to diversify your players. Make sure you're picking players that fit the format first and foremost. So I think that's the second thing. Instead of trying to say, oh, I don't want to have too many shares of this player because I'm in 15 leagues. I don't want to have this quarterback on 8 teams. That's fine, but use the formats to pick and choose where you get those. Use that as your way to diversify and not just diversifying for the sake of doing it. And then the last thing is when you are making draft picks, as you get to the really cheap draft picks, so like your 3rd, 4th, 5th round picks or whatever, that is where I'm concentrating on getting a certain player as many times as I can. So instead of saying, okay, I have a 4th round pick in all 15 of my leagues, I'm going to take 15 different players. I'd rather take the same player 15 times. And I'm probably going to really dial in why I'm taking that one player or this 2 players or whatever it is. But I want to be able to, if I hit on that player, I want to be able to have multiple shares of them across my leagues to go, okay, I now have 15 leagues. I have this player, Elijah Mitchell from 2 years ago. I have him in 6 different leagues across my 15. Now guess what I can do? How do I get the most value for Elijah Mitchell? Because there's going to be a couple leagues where people go, I don't really believe in him. I don't want him. That sucks. I hit on him. He's good, but no one will trade for him. But I bet you across 6 leagues, somebody in the 6 leagues, one person will trade for him. So you actually leverage all your leagues against each other. I do that all the time. If a player pops and I look and I have him on 8 different teams, you know what I do? I go to all 8 teams and I say, I'm willing to trade this player. And instead of taking offers from Stacy and Tyler and one other person in the same league, I take 20 offers in 8 different leagues and put them all against each other. So it's expanding the pool. You have more people coming to the table and you can be a little more picky and you'll get a higher price.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, I know we are coming in up and it out at 9 o'clock right now, so I definitely don't want to keep you here all night, although I have a billion questions that I could be asking you. Last thing before we let you go, I want to know, besides Marvin Harrison Jr., Caleb Williams, Drake May, give me somebody who should be on our radar. I was going to say from each position group, but I know we need to kind of get going here because the fourth and frames crew is going to be up pretty soon. Give me one guy that we should be on the lookout for 2024.
Okay, so I have a bunch of leagues where we draft Devy players. So it's basically college players. You draft them before they come into the NFL. I'll give a shout out to Matt Bruning of Campus to Canton. He's been on this player for a long time. But right now, on the show sheet, you put Caleb Williams and Drake May. Those are pretty much the top two quarterbacks for next year, both favorites to be picked in the top three. But then there's probably like 12 quarterbacks that you could justify could be the QB3. And just historically, it's pretty good odds you're going to have a third or fourth quarterback in the mix to be a first-round pick. And there's a ton of them. And the one that no one really talks about, that no one really picks out the path of where you could see them, is Ohio State Kyle McCord. The Ohio State quarterback, Kyle McCord. He sat behind C.J. Stroud for 2 years. He may not even win the job. But I also know if he wins the job, he's throwing to Marvin Harrison, Emeka Egbuka. They have two stud freshman receiver. Like, the last 3 Ohio State quarterbacks have gone in the first round.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty good path to, if I'm in a league that drafts college players, I've just taken him simply for that reason. Even if he doesn't come into the NFL next year, you're going to know pretty quickly if he's the Ohio State starter and he's bad, what's going to happen? He's probably going to get benched because they have 2 other 5-star quarterbacks on the team. But if he's good, he probably has a track to have a really good chance to get draft capital. I would say the same thing about Tyler Buckner, Ty Simpson, or Jalen Milroe, but they are 3 quarterbacks on Alabama. So that's one where I'd be willing to bet on whoever the Alabama quarterback is to get to the NFL, but they literally have 3 of them and they have no clue who's going to start. So I'll just avoid that until we get some clarity. But Kyle McCord, I think and the good news is if you have him and he doesn't make it, he's easy to say he's not going to make it. You get a quick turnaround. Yeah. You don't have to wait 3 years to figure it out. You're gonna know halfway through the season if he's gonna make it or not.
All right, guys, you heard it here first. Kyle McCord better be on everybody's radar for next year. Scott, huge thank you again for coming and spending your evening with us. Make sure that you guys go follow Scott if you're not already. He's at Charles Chill FFB. Scott, remind everybody where else they can find all of your content online.
Yeah, appreciate you both having me on. It was fun. Some good Dynasty content, some good Dynasty strategy talk. Most of my stuff is either on Trades in 5, which is a YouTube channel. We live stream every Tuesday night at 8:30. Some of the questions, some of the people that came in the chat tonight, I know them from Trades in 5. So shout out to them. We get a lot of questions like Koogski's question, like talk me through how to maneuver, my draft board or maneuver my roster. So check that out if you like just Dynasty strategy and Dynasty trade discussion. Destination Devy, I have 2 podcasts that I host over there on a weekly basis. I co-host a show with Eric Vanek. We do something called America's Game. We just talk all about like degenerate Dynasty strategy. Like we literally went through every single skill player in the NFL, the last 2 episodes. So we're talking about what practice squad running backs to stash and stuff like that. So and then Destination Dynasty is my show, which is a lot of just Dynasty theory and strategy talk. So those 2. And I do want to give a shout out to Jay Reed, Stacy.
Yes.
Shout out to Jay. Yeah. Can't wait to run another series of high stakes leagues with Jay this year. I hope we see you in Kentucky this year.
You absolutely will.
But yeah, shout out to Jay at Chasing the Helmet. We've played high stakes together now. This will be our 7th year. And that 6-time main event champion in the Twitter bio, a lot of that is due to Jay. He brought me on when I had never played in a high stakes league. And he's like, hey, you seem pretty sharp. You want to just like team up? Because my old partner, like he quit. I'm like, oh, sure. How much money can I win? And he is like, that's the person I want. And ever since, he's been a great teammate. So shout out to Jay.
Oh yeah. Huge shout out to Jay Reed. He's amazing. He's one of my favorite people. And yeah, I definitely can't wait to see you guys in Kentucky in August. Make sure to give us a follow over on Twitter. You can follow Tyler at @FF_Tyler Heil. You can follow me at Stacy_Perez83 and make sure to follow the show at Dynasty365 show. Make sure to visit the website. Give us a subscribe on the YouTube. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. We will be back next week. Have a good night, everybody.